Okay, we're going to be talking about hand applique. Remember, if you're working on the from the bottom of the fabric, if you're putting something there like either freezer paper or the fusible, you do need to have your pattern reversed. So just read the instructions to see if it says that it's already been reversed. You can always make a copy and put it up in a window or on a light box, and then you know, lay your pattern whichever way you need to be in order to transfer it over onto your fabric or your freezer paper. When you're working with the freezer paper, that's going to be going on the back side of your fabric. You can, I have done it where I've worked from the top, but I'm going to be showing you from the back side. So you're going to trace out your shape onto the freezer paper and then cut out the shape along the lines. That's your seam lines. Seam allowances have not been added, so you will have to go and cut it out, cut your fabric out larger to allow for seam allowances. So I have done that here. I've got my heart shape. It's on the back of my fabric. I had cut it out to the shape, the actual size, and I've got my fabric larger on all sides to allow for seam allowances. So after you have your freezer paper on there, you can go and trim it, and this is going to be trim it for your seam allowance amount. So I'm doing about 1/4 of an inch beyond it. We're going to base this down. You do not clip curves or clip into the V when you're doing this. I'm just going to go in a bit, but whenever you're actually stitching it down onto your piece, that's when you actually go and clip the curves and clip into the V. That way it won't be fraying way ahead of time. So you're just going to cut it out. And so I've got my shape here, and then I've got a threaded needle. I'm using a contrasting thread so that I can see it, and you're just going to start basting it around. I do have a knot in this, but I'm going to put the knot on the top so I can get to it whenever I've got to take my paper out. And just take large basting stitches, making sure to catch your fabric in it. So I'm just going to go ahead and baste all this around. I am not going to cut into the V here. I'm just going to baste around and then just jump over and, you know, fold it down to like that. But I'm not going to cut down into the V until I'm actually putting it on the background. So, and then when I get down here to the bottom, I'm going to try to get closer. So as I'm working around, you're going to fold one end over so that it's like that, and then you'll fold the other end up like that. So that will get your points, and then when they're stitched in, I'll show you how to handle the points and when you're actually stitching it onto your background. But this will help you to get nice smooth points. Now I'm basting with needle and thread. You can also use a glue stick and use like a cuticle stick, and then you would just get the paper and the fabric with the glue stick, and then you use that cuticle to turn it over and to kind of smooth it out. And then you just work on that. Let it dry a bit, and then it's ready for you to go. When you remove that, when you're finished, you're going to have to get your piece completely wet, cut the fabric on the back, and then pull the paper out. The way that I'm showing you here with just basting this, we'll still cut the back, but we don't have to get it wet. We'll just cut the back, and then we'll pull out our basting, and we'll pull out the paper that's in here. The freezer paper templates, you can usually use those 3 or 4 times before you have to get a new one. So it's easy to, you know, get several uses out of it first. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of stitch around on this for a while. Oh, one thing I also forgot to mention is that whenever you're cutting your thread to stitch, if you are left-handed, you want to tie a knot on the thread the way it comes off of the spool clip your thread about 18 inches long, and then thread that in when you cut it off from the spool. Thread that in into your needle. If you're right-handed, you want to thread it into the needle and then cut your 18 inches off and tie a knot in the end that came from the spool. Thread is twisted in a certain direction, and it will help you not get knots in it whenever you're stitching with it, if you do that with it. Now I'm pretty well down to about where all I can go to turn it down without having to cut into it. So I'm just going to take a big stitch and go across. And like I said, when you get down here to the point, or just make sure you have that all folded back so that you can get this nice and smooth here. But you can see here I've got a nice point here, and that's what it looks like on the back where I went and did that. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and finish this. Okay, so on my background piece I cut it 7.5 inches, and I lightly pressed each side so that I would be able to have some lines in order to line up my heart. I also kind of lightly pressed my heart, just finger pressed it. I folded it in half so I could get a registration line on that, and I matched up my V and the point and that along with where the press lines were. I used applique pins to pin this down on my fabric on the top, and they're like 3/4 of an inch long, so they don't get in the way as much as the other pins whenever you're working with them. Thinking about your thread selection, you try to match the piece that you're appliquing, and so I went through what I had for purples, since that's the color of the piece that I'm appliquing, and I didn't have, most of them were too bright, but I did find a darker one. Go darker instead of lighter. Lighter has a tendency to kind of sparkle when the light hits it, and it'll stand out more than a darker piece will. Most of the time whenever I hand applique, I use silk thread that is really thin, and it just seems to just get buried in the fibers, and it's not very noticeable at all. But I wanted to do something so that you could be able to see what I was doing, hopefully. So I've got a knot tied on my thread here. I'm going to come up from the background, and you want to come up into the fold of your piece here. You're going to be in the fold of it. So pull your thread on up, and then you're going to take a bite close to where you came up at, but you want to take the bite in the background up underneath the fold, and then come up into the fold. And you're just going to take a little tiny bite there, and then pull it through. That's going to be your applique stitch. You're just going to keep doing that, taking a bite in the background and a bite in your fold. Every so often, go ahead and go to the back and make a back stitch to help hold this, so that if for any reason it comes undone, it's not going to unravel the whole thing. Your stitches should be really close to each other, about a 1/16 of an inch, no bigger than an 1/8 of an inch. But the more that you do this, the easier it will get for you. And when you get up to the V on the heart, that's when you're going to cut into it. And you need to take several stitches right there, because that's going to be a spot that can fray, because you're going to go really close to it, to where it needs to be, so you can get a nice V there in the section there. Okay, take another stitch or two, and then I'll clip that V. So if your stitches show, you either use the wrong thread They're not taken up underneath the fold, or they're too loose. This is the point I need to clip. So I'm right here at the V. I'm going to kind of look here on the back a bit. I'm just going to put my needle here, park it, because I want to cut down into this. So I cut down into it. You can see right there how I did that. But I've got it cut down into it here. And so you're going to have to do a little bit of a needle turn because that part wasn't basted down. So you can just use your needle to help flip it down. And you're going to use your thumb to help hold it while you get up there to stitch. And that's what needle turn is when you're working on needle turn. You're using the needle to help flip it down under there. If you have some really tricky spots, you can use a toothpick. It will help to, the wood will help to grab the fabric and get it for you. So you're just going to keep working down here and take 2 or 3 stitches when you get down there in that V. I'm going to go ahead and put this other side down so I can hold it all. Okay, I'm getting down near the corner here, and so I'm going to take a couple of stitches. And when I get down here at the bottom, I probably got just one more stitch. You're going to come out in the point. Then when you come out of that, you want to pull it. Just take an extra stitch right there at the point and pull it straight out to make it go down, and then take your bite back into the background and come up over at the fold on the side. But when you pull on that to come straight down, you're pulling that fabric to make sure that it goes out and it makes a nice point there. Okay, now I've gotten all of my stitching done on here. You can see I took a few back stitches. That's a piece of thread. But I've got my knots. They're down in what's going to be the seam allowance. And so now I'm going to go ahead and remove my basting. Like I said, you put your knot on the top so you're able to go ahead and get that knot so it's not going to be there. And you can just work it pulling the basting out. But you want to go around the whole thing and get all the basting out. Take a few steps to help get this sped up. There's a lot of different tools that are available on the market for doing applique. I just showed you just the very basic, because you can go get freezer paper that you can run through your printer. There's stiff material that you can put in the back. You don't have to go back and remove. If you put paper or something in there, or something that's not going to degrade and break apart whenever you wash it, then you're definitely going to want to go in and take it out. And even on some of the places where it overlaps, because depending on what's on the top of this, if something was to set on the top of it, like on one quilt that I've got, it's an angel wing sitting on top of her dress on the back, and I did not cut that out. I should have, but the dress is showing through and it bled through onto the angel wings on the top. So, you know, keep that in mind when you're layering things. So I've got all the basting thread pulled out. So now I'm going to go, and on the back you're going to pull this up from the paper, because you can feel the paper in there. So you want to pull it and get just the fabric and clip it so you can get in on the inside. So I've got a little clip there, and then you're going to trim this off. But just clip this all the way around, leaving your seam allowance. And then you can pull the paper out. If you were using the glue, you have to get it all wet. Use tweezers to pull it out. But I've got it all out now. And you can see where it's trimmed on the back. And then you would go give this a press. And when you press it from the top. Put a towel down on your pressing surface so that it will help to push your applique up. It won't flatten it out so bad. This is all done, so I can go and trim this now and get it down to my 6.5 inches, which is the size I needed to sew in. 6.5. I've got a 6.5 inch ruler. I'm going to line it up on the marks here and then check to make sure that I've got about the same amount of the heart showing on the both sides, so that it's all lined up, and then just go ahead and trim it down. And then this will be ready to sew into my block. I would make 3 more so that you would have 4 just lining up with each other there to make my block. So that's how you do the hand applique.